Hello everyone, my name is Slade, I'll be your host, and welcome to Star Wars Did You Know? Before we begin today's video, it should be noted that I am chiefly using old canon sources, legends, rather than the Disney canon material. In the case of Thrawn, I am ignoring his current Disney canon material simply because we don't know the ultimate conclusion of his story, and I feel that his original material from the legends is actually stronger material to go off of versus what is currently being used in the Disney canon. The exception to this Legends canon source is going to be Ray Sloane, who is the only Disney canon material that will be used directly in this video. I hope you enjoy it. The rank of Grand Admiral was the highest military rank that an officer could attain in the Galactic Empire. Appointed directly by the Emperor, and answerable only to him and his executors, the rank carried with it the authority to overrule any and all military or civilian personnel within the Galactic Empire's hierarchy. In practice, however, many Grand Admirals would answer to Grand Moffs, or other warlords, or even councils of such people, rather than exert their own authority as the Empire continued and eventually crumbled after Palpatine's death. The rank of Grand Admiral was created by Emperor Palpatine in 2 BBY, and referred to by the Emperor as his Circle of 12, and only 12 Grand Admirals could be assigned at any given time. Personally chosen by Palpatine, these were individuals who were seen as having special capabilities by the Emperor, although many beyond the Emperor questioned his choices, as while some of the officers who were selected to be Grand Admirals were certainly strong strategists and tacticians, being skilled in naval combat, many were simply strange and odd choices, who had not distinguished themselves beyond perhaps being devoted to the Emperor. Ultimately, we know of 14 Grand Admirals in total, only one of whom was not chosen directly by the Emperor himself. What follows is a brief overview of each of these 14. Marcio Batch was perhaps the most secret of the initial 12 Grand Admirals selected by Emperor Palpatine, and he was nicknamed the Invisible Admiral because of his dislike and lack of participation in Imperial politics. He was tasked by the Emperor to develop a fully functional cloaking device, and he was initially successful in designing a hybridium cloak. However, it was flawed, as the pilot of the cloaked ship could not see out from within the cloak when it was activated. Abandoning the hybridium design, he instead tried a rarer Stygium crystal design. However, Stygium crystal was no longer available to the Empire, and so to obtain it from within the crust of 8 and 2, he used the superlaser platform Tarkin to destroy the planet to obtain the necessary crystals. Once the crystals had been obtained, he created the very successful TIE Phantom, which blended the powerful platform of TIE design with a functional cloaking device. However, after the destruction of the TIE Phantom project by rebel agents, he fled from the Emperor's wrath. Ultimately, he was assassinated in the Outer Rim by his own crew. Niall Declan was a Clone Wars veteran and Force-sensitive who would become a dark side adept to the Emperor. Trained by the prophets of the dark side, he was skilled in battle meditation, and this skill saw him stationed aboard the second Death Star during the Battle of Endor, in which he used his abilities to help bolster Imperial forces. However, his concentration and ultimately the meditation was disrupted by the death of the Emperor, and Niall would soon follow his master when the station was destroyed. Octavian Grant was a noble from the Tepani sect. He often saw himself as superior to those not of noble birth, and held a particular dislike for droids and non-humans. Despite this, however, he was an expert military strategist, though he was disliked strongly by both his peers and underlings. Because of this, he found himself alone without any military forces following the Battle of Endor. In part due to this, he aligned himself with the Pentastar alignment. However, he eventually turned himself into the Republic, in exchange for information on Imperial forces as well as his own safety. He was placed under house arrest on the planet Rathalay. Later, he would offer to fight Grand Admiral Thrawn, but was refused due to Republic mistrust. However, some years later, the Republic would call upon him to help fight the Emperor Reborn. Grant would also assist the New Republic in killing Grand Moff Ardus Kane, before again being placed under house arrest on Rathalay, where he was often toasted in high society as the last Grand Admiral, a title which he used to his benefit throughout the rest of his days. Joseph Grunger was considered unsubtle and disloyal by his fellow Grand Admirals. However, despite this, he remained strangely loyal to Palpatine until Endor, after which time he seized the planet Gargan for himself, and set himself up as a warlord, declaring himself the new Emperor. He amassed a large fleet of Star Destroyers and cruisers, including the Superstar Destroyer Aggressor. He considered swearing loyalty to Palpatine's supposed son, Draculus. However, ultimately, when Draculus was defeated, he had concocted his own plan to attack Coruscant and place himself on the throne. He was confronted in the Corellian system by fellow Grand Admiral Tonetta Peeta. Peeta used the torpedo sphere to destroy Grunger's fleet, but not before Grunger rammed the aggressor into the torpedo sphere, killing both Grand Admirals. Ishin-Il-Raz was a fanatical supporter of the New Order, and idolized Palpatine heavily. Highly humanocentric, he led the Commission for the Preservation of the New Order, and when he was ultimately appointed as Grand Admiral, many were confused as he had almost no military experience. However, despite this, he committed several gruesome atrocities and massacres in the Emperor's name, isolating him from his peers and fellow Grand Admirals who saw him as a fanatic. When the Emperor's death was announced after Endor, Ishin-Il-Raz became suicidal, and 8 months following Endor plunged himself and his Star Destroyer into the Denari Nova. Afshin Makati was considered an uninspired military leader, and a strange choice for a Grand Admiral. He developed a hatred for the Prophets of the Dark Side following an incident on the planet Thilla, and he was present at the Battle of Endor, but ultimately survived and fled to Coruscant. Once there, he said he would swear allegiance to whoever claimed Imperial Center. In time, he would kill a pretender to the throne, a false prophet of the dark side, before dying fighting in the corporate sector, trying to keep it under Imperial control. Tonetta Peeta was a rabid xenophobe, although he was not fully human himself, and some accused him of trying to cover that fact up by being particularly harsh to non-humans. Considered extreme even by other humanocentric organizations, most advocates for human supremacy avoided him. He conducted a campaign of depopulation of non-humans in the Outer Rim, but following Endor became the unofficial protector of the Corellian sector. It was here that he would use a torpedo sphere to defeat and ultimately kill his fellow Grand Admiral Joseph Grunger, but not before Grunger plunged his Super Star Destroyer into the torpedo sphere, killing them both. Pakati Sin was a highly religious individual and follower of the Sacred Way. However, he was forced to abandon his religion following the rise of the Empire. When the Emperor died at Endor, however, he lost faith in the Empire as a whole, and became a follower of the Prophets of the Dark Side to satiate his need for religious faith. He would eventually fight and die over the planet Kashyyyk against Admiral Gyal Akbar. Milton Tekele was a veteran fleet admiral and skilled commander. However, he suffered from several vices, including addiction to spice and a love of non-human women, facts that his brother, Governor Griff Tekele, did his best to hide in order to keep the family name intact. He possessed a limited telepathic ability thanks to his addiction to glitterstim spice. However, he lost influence following the Emperor's death, and was forced out of his holdings by fellow Grand Admiral Joseph Grunger. He eventually allied himself with Triculus to try and revenge himself against Grunger, though ultimately this alliance would result in him being executed by Grand Moff Hissa for questioning Triculus's plans. Oswald Tesha was a respected strategist, who was given command of the Imperial Center Oversector, which included the Imperial capital, as well as several other key core worlds and many powerful fleets. However, when he failed to rescue Imperial advisor Ko Veshiv, he was punished by the Emperor by being sent to conquer the Hapes cluster with insufficient support. It was in the Hapes cluster that he would be permanently disfigured, needing 75% reconstruction with cybernetics on his body. Because of this disfigurement and the shame of his defeat, he was shunned and ostracized by his fellow Grand Admirals. However, despite this, he was present at Endor and escaped the destruction of the second Death Star. He would then attempt to rally the Imperial forces, and would go on to fight for a further 4 hours as Imperial fleet forces trickled away and fled the battle before he was ultimately captured. At his trial on the New Republic, he was convicted of war crimes, but not before he mocked his captors, telling them their war was far from over. Rafan Tigelinus was known for being charismatic and politically savvy, and was considered a key player at the Imperial court. He spent most of his military time as a Grand Admiral hunting pirates in the Outer Rim. However, in his time in court, he allied himself with various Moffs and Grand Moffs to gain political power, and became a member of the exclusive Order of the Canted Circle. He would befriend and later betray Grand Admiral Thrawn, playing a part in his exile at court. He would later use his political clout to be appointed Grand Moff of Imperial Center Oversector. After Endor, he attempted to ally with the Central Committee of Grand Moffs. However, he was betrayed by a perceived friend and ally, and ultimately executed for disloyalty. Demetrius Zoran was a talented technician, and head of starfighter research and development for the Empire. In this role, he was critical in developing several of the Empire's best starfighters, and obtaining new technologies for the Empire from other political powers. However, he eventually grew dissatisfied with the Empire, and prepared to defeat Palpatine and assume control of the Empire for himself. Upon his betrayal, he very nearly killed the Emperor, but was ultimately defeated by Vice Admiral Thrawn, who would be promoted to Grand Admiral to replace Zoran. Zoran fled from Thrawn into the Outer Rim, where his ship was destroyed by Thrawn's sabotage. Thrawn was the only non-human Grand Admiral, and the last Grand Admiral appointed by Palpatine. He was found by Imperial officer Vars Park in the Unknown Regions. When he was brought before Palpatine, Thrawn was admitted into the Imperial Naval Academy, where he rose rapidly in the ranks, fighting both rebel and rogue Imperial forces. He would eventually be promoted to Grand Admiral to replace Demetrius Zoran, who he defeated in battle. Following this, he'd be sent to the unknown regions, prior to Endor, under supposed exile from the Imperial court. He would return years later to take control of Imperial military forces. And despite a successful campaign against the New Republic, he was eventually killed by his own bodyguard, a Nagri named Rook. Ray Sloane was a dedicated naval officer, serving the Empire, who would rise rapidly through the ranks, coming to the attention of both the Emperor and Darth Vader. She would fight at Endor, and manage to escape with her Star Destroyer intact. She'd be promoted following Endor to Grand Admiral, making her the only Grand Admiral not promoted directly by the Emperor. In this role, she would initiate fake peace talks with the Republic to distract from Imperial operations. However, she'd be betrayed by her allies, although their assassination attempt on her would be foiled. Following this betrayal of her Imperial allies, she assisted the New Republic to defeat them, before fleeing into the unknown regions to found the First Order. And that accounts for all 14 Grand Admirals. Now, it is worth noting that it is mentioned that there may have been other Grand Admirals appointed by the Emperor Reborn, however, none of them are ever named, and it's never confirmed if they actually existed or not, or if it was simply a rumor. There is one special note I'd like to make about this, and that is in the case of Ray Sloane. In doing my research for this character, I found her story to be incredibly compelling and interesting, and I realized, much to my frustration, that there is no reason for her to be a Disney canon character. Her story could easily have fit into the old canon, what's now called the Legends canon. And the only reason I can think of for making her Disney canon is simply laziness on the part of the people who currently own Star Wars, and do not wish to actually look into the canon and figure out how to make their story work with what already existed. It's incredibly unfortunate, because Ray Sloane could have added a fascinating plot line to the original canon. And again, there was no reason for her not to be there. She could easily have been there, as there were only ever 12 Grand Admirals at a time, several of which died following Endor, which meant that Ray Sloane could have easily filled their holes. However, Disney being what it is, elected to wipe the canon and erase all but one of the original Grand Admirals and give us one new one. Alright everyone, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, feel free to like and subscribe. There'll be more content coming. If you'd like to support the channel on Patreon, please do so. Every little bit helps. Until next time, this is your host Slade, and this has been Star Wars Did You Know?